I'm honoured, Eve, to be asked to say a few words as we unveil this wonderful quilt this afternoon. I first heard about the quilt when I came to the diocese to a dinner which was held at the brewery early in 2013, a bit before I was consecrated. And at that dinner, the book, Glorious Gifts, was launched, and the link with the small artistic items that the women clergy of this diocese had made. And Gillian was not only one of the editors of the book, but it is she who composed the quilt. And I'm going to kind of move away from tradition where you always say something and then you unveil, because I want to unveil the quilt right now, the framed quilt, so that I can say a few things and it will be obvious to us all what I'm talking about. So I am honoured to be able to unveil this quilt, which was made in commemoration and to mark 20 years of women's ministry, women's ordained ministry in this diocese. And so I think that actually, as you unveil, I get a clap. Oh. I can't think of a better artistic medium to use as a metaphor for women's ministry than a patchwork quilt. And let me say why, just a few words about why I think that is. Traditionally, patchwork quilting is a women's art form. It's made by reusing fabric, by saving scraps in a most economical way, and then creatively embroidering and embellishing with overstitching, with little buttons and decorative features, like a little cross there and a little, I think that's a little bell or a little heart, and there's a little piece of ribbon, and then putting it all together. Patchwork quilts came from necessity, but are very beautiful. The other thing about patchwork quilts is that it looked in the mechanised age like they might die out, and the making of patchwork quilts came to be confined to really just a few cultural groups who kept to traditional ways of life, but there has been a great resurgence and a valuing of quilts. Now, the features of a quilt like this are really quite like the features of women's theological insights, which have seen a flowering since, we might say, the 1970s. Women theologians were the first to insist that personal insights and academic insights were not polar opposites, but needed to be held together. I believe that a quilt like this says there are no bits that can't go in. It will all go in and it will all be okay. It might look that the individual pieces, you could say, how will it all come together? But just as women doing theology, remarkable and diverse insights have come together. Women theologians were among the first to really embrace and make their own postmodern academic insights which say that the personal is as valid as the apparently theoretical. Women were the first to insist that we redo biblical exegesis, to look and see what were the scraps of the text we were overlooking. Where in the interstices of the text might we find greater meaning and value? What was being left out of the text? What could we understand from the silence? What could we gather together, put together and compile to make something whole? What were the blind spots as well as the insights of those who wrote our biblical texts? What indeed was it that God was saying, if what God was sometimes saying was not what the surface value of the text would say? It was women, biblical scholars, who insisted on a more sophisticated approach to the text that has gone far beyond what was known as the feminist hermeneutic and has actually influenced most biblical scholarship as we know it today. And I think it comes from women's understanding that the personal is not separated from the academic or the theoretical. It comes from women's understanding that you retrieve whatever you have of value, that economy is important, that the reuse and the reconsideration of the materials you have before you will give you something really good and new. I think that when you look at this, you see a metaphor for the way in which much theology and biblical studies are done today, and was pioneered by women from women's particular mindset and experience. There is also something else about this. It's the diversity of each piece, and it speaks to me of the diversity not only of women's theological and scriptural scholarship, which is very diverse. It cannot be easily categorised today, and nor can you stereotype women's ministry. Women have very diverse approaches to their ministry. Some women are clearly suited to chaplaincy, some to parish ministry. Others have insisted on insights in parish ministry that are now, from their own life, that are now more common than they were. For example, the insistence on listening to those who appear to be without a voice in a parish. Some women enter the ministry quite young, others quite old. Some are married, some are unmarried, some are quite conservative in their theology and their approach to life. Some are very radical. Some are married, some are unmarried. The diversity of women in their ministry is shown here. But above all, I think the beauty of this artwork reflects the beauty of God, and every act of ministry, every theological insight is of course inspired by the Holy Spirit and reflects the beauty of God. So when we look at this is a glimpse. This is a little glimpse of heaven and the glory of God, and it sparkles. It sparkles like heaven, and it there is the blue, which we all know from Orthodox churches' ceilings, the glimpse of heaven, and the kind of sense of starlight in all of this. Now, it's going to go most appropriately around the corner here. We thought there'd be too many of us to actually do the launch around there, on a sky blue wall, which sets it off very well. So when you're here, you will be able to nick around for a glimpse of heaven. And I want to encourage you to make as much use of the library as possible. This library is a treasure. I can say that it is absolutely the friendliest and most helpful theological library in Australia. It is a great space to work in, and it is an enormous credit to Eve James and to Susan and to all who helped to make the library what it is. Thank you.